Welcome to One Wrong Move, where one small decision set the whole chain in motion. Today's story starts with three men pouring nuclear fuel by hand, out of stainless steel buckets, and ends somewhere nobody saw coming. 10:30 in the morning, the 30th of September 1999. A quiet fuel plant in Tokai, Japan. Three men are making nuclear fuel, and they are doing it with steel buckets. Not a reactor, not a bomb. Just a workroom, a wide metal tank, and a job somebody wanted finished faster. One of them tips a bucket of uranium into the tank, the seventh bucket of the morning, and the air lights up with a blue flash. In that instant, the room crosses a line no workroom should ever cross. Nobody can see the danger directly, and by the time anyone understands what those buckets started, there is no switch to turn it off. Let me back up and show you how three men ended up doing this by hand. The plant belonged to a company called JCO. It was a fuel conversion plant. That means it didn't run a reactor, and it didn't split atoms for power. It prepared the raw material. It took uranium and turned it into a form that other places could later use as reactor fuel. Chemistry, not power generation. On this day, they were making a special batch for an experimental reactor. The uranium in it was unusually rich. Most reactor fuel is enriched to around 3 to 5%. This batch was enriched to about 19%. Hold on to that number. The richer the uranium, the less of it you need before things get dangerous. Because uranium has a habit that most materials do not have. Gather too much of it in one place, and it wakes up. Pack enough of it close together and the atoms start splitting on their own. Each split kicks off the next one. That runaway chain is called going critical. It throws off a brutal, invisible blast of radiation. It is not an explosion. It is not a fire. It is just a quiet, glowing reaction that pours out an unseen flood of radiation. The whole job of a fuel plant is to make sure that never, ever happens by accident. So how do you stop a pile of uranium from waking up? You would think the answer is some alarm or some switch. It is not. The real safeguard is a shape. This is the part that matters most, so stay with me. The protection was built into the shape of the equipment. The licensed process sent the uranium through a tall, narrow column, thin, like a standpipe. In a tall, thin tube, the uranium is spread out. The atoms are too far apart to feed each other. Stray particles leak out through the walls instead of striking the next atom. The chain can never build. The narrow shape does not need a guard or a switch. The geometry itself makes a chain reaction impossible. That tall column was the safety system. Not a sensor, not a button, just a careful, deliberate shape. And there was a hard limit on the page, too. The amount of uranium in one batch was capped near 2.5 kilograms. Stay under that mass, keep the solution in that narrow shape, and the uranium stays asleep, every time. Now here is where it starts to go wrong, and it goes wrong slowly, over years. The official, government-approved procedure was careful and slow, so the company quietly wrote its own. Somewhere along the way, JCO produced an in-house manual that did not match its license. The illegal manual let workers skip the proper dissolving vessel and mix the uranium in stainless steel buckets instead. Buckets are faster, buckets are easy, and a bucket has no clever shape protecting anybody. For a while, even that shortcut held. The batches still stayed small and the solution still passed through the narrow column at the end. But on this morning, the men went one step further than even their own illegal manual allowed. They were behind. They wanted the batch finished, so they skipped the tall, narrow column completely. Instead, they poured the dissolved uranium straight into a different vessel, a wide, squat precipitation tank. It was the wrong shape entirely, round and broad, the exact opposite of thin and tall. And it had no geometry safeguard at all. It was only ever meant to be safe if the mass limit was obeyed. Worse, The tank was wrapped in a water-cooling jacket, and water does something cruel here. Water bounces stray particles back inward. It acts like a mirror, reflecting the reaction back into the uranium. So now you have a wide tank with no shape protection, ringed by a jacket that pushes the danger back in. If you can already feel where this is going, stay with me, because it is worse than you think. And if this is your kind of story, hit subscribe right now. So picture the workroom on that last morning. 2 men work at the tank. A third sits at a desk a few steps away, keeping the paperwork. They are dissolving uranium in buckets, then carrying it over and tipping it into the wide tank by hand. One pours. One steadies a funnel, bucket after bucket. The uranium piles up in the tank. Remember the limit, about 2.5 kilograms of uranium in one batch. That is the line. They aren't counting it that way. They're just emptying buckets one after another, until the batch looks done. The amount in the tank climbs past the limit. 3 times over, 5 times over. And then the 7th bucket goes in. With that pour, the uranium in the tank reaches about 16 kilograms. Against a safe limit of about 2.5, roughly 7 times too much in the worst possible shape. And the uranium wakes up. There is a blue flash in the air. The criticality alarms scream. A self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction has switched on inside an open tank, in an unshielded room. The 2 men at the tank are standing right on top of it. They are flooded with radiation in seconds. The man at the desk, a few steps back, is hit too. All 3 feel heat and pain and a strange taste. They do not need a meter to tell them that something is terribly wrong. They turn and they run. Stop here. Look at what just happened. The entire industry had one rule above all others: never let too much uranium gather in one place. And the protection was not a high-tech alarm. It was a shape. A tall, narrow column the atoms could not survive in. The men deleted that shape. By hand. They swapped a criticality-proof column for stainless steel buckets and a wide-open tank. Then they poured in about 7 times the safe amount of uranium. And a live nuclear reaction switched on in a workroom, not behind meters of concrete, beside 3 men in shirts. That is the one wrong move. Not sabotage, not a faulty reactor, not a natural disaster. A bucket, a shortcut, a wide tank instead of a narrow tube. Each of those choices on its own looked like a small way to save time. Together they started a nuclear chain reaction in a room you could walk into. And now the part that makes this so strange. There was no off switch. A power reactor can drop control rods and choke a reaction in seconds. This was an open tank in a workroom. Nobody had ever planned to shut down a chain reaction in a place like this. There was no procedure for it. So the reaction did not stop. It settled into a slow, ugly pulse. It would heat the solution, boil off a little, calm down, then build and surge again, on and off for hours. There was no explosion the whole time. Just an invisible reaction flickering on and off in a tank that no one could safely approach. To kill it, they had to think about why it was alive. 2 things were feeding it: the uranium itself, and the water jacket around the tank that kept reflecting the reaction back inward. So the first move was to attack the jacket, drain the cooling water, and take the mirror away. Workers went in short bursts to reach the pipes. Every second near that tank cost them dose. They drained the water jacket. With the mirror gone, the reaction dropped hard. Then they pumped in a solution of boric acid. Boron drinks up the stray particles that keep a chain alive. Drain the mirror, add the absorber, and at last the uranium goes quiet for good. By the next morning, after about 20 hours, the chain reaction was finally fully dead. Now the human cost, and I want to handle this part carefully because it is easy to turn it into a horror show. 3 workers were caught in that invisible blast. Their doses were measured in sieverts. A sievert is just the unit for how much radiation a body absorbs. A small fraction of one is already serious. Above roughly 8 sieverts in one hit is generally considered beyond saving. The man who poured is estimated to have taken something like 17 sieverts, more than twice a fatal dose. The doses are estimates with a real spread, because no one can measure such a thing precisely after the fact. The second man at the tank took something near 10 sieverts, the man at the desk around 3. All 3 were rushed to hospital. The 2 at the tank had absorbed amounts no person had ever survived. Doctors tried everything medicine had. The first man held on for about 83 days before he died that December. The second man lived into the following spring, then died as well. 2 men gone from one morning's work. The third man, the supervisor at the desk, survived. He was treated for radiation sickness, and after about 3 months he was released. 2 dead, 1 survivor. From buckets, a wide tank, and a single batch poured about 7 times too rich, from a shortcut. While the men fought for their lives, the danger was leaking out past the fence. A criticality does not just glow. It sends radiation out into the air around it the whole time it pulses. And this one sat in a flimsy workroom, not a reactor dome. There was little between the tank and the street. Hours passed before the scale of it was understood. The response was slow because no one had drilled for this. Eventually, the order came. The closest residents, about 161 people, were evacuated. They lived within roughly 350 meters of the plant, close enough to be a real concern. Then the circle widened. Around 310,000 people within 10 kilometers were told to stay indoors. Stay inside, shut the windows, stop the farm work and the harvest, and wait. It must have felt enormous, and here is the part that matters told honestly. Off the plant site, no member of the public was killed. No resident suffered radiation sickness. The largest dose to any member of the public was tiny next to the workers, on the order of 16 thousandths of a sievert. The shelter order was lifted the next afternoon. The town had been frightened, not poisoned. The full weight of this fell on the 3 men in that room. That distinction matters, so I am stating it plainly. If this is landing, take 1 second and subscribe. A nuclear chain reaction switched on by hand in a room with no shielding that should not fade from your memory. So how does a thing like this happen? The answer was not bad luck. International investigators looked hard at the plant. Their conclusion was blunt. The cause, in the words of the global nuclear watchdog, was human error and serious breaches of safety principles. The company had run an unauthorized procedure for years. The shortcut was not one bad day, it was the routine. The workers had not been trained to understand criticality. Nobody on that floor fully grasped what the buckets risked. The fallout for the company was total. JCO lost its license to operate. It was the first such revocation in the country. Executives were taken to court and convicted over the safety failures that led to 2 deaths. And the accident forced the whole country to rebuild how it prepared for a nuclear emergency. The law itself was rewritten. Now step back from the whole chain and look at it end to end. It started with a process whose only real protection was a shape, a tall, narrow column the uranium could not survive in. It ran through a company that wrote its own illegal manual and let buckets replace the proper vessel. Through 3 men behind schedule, skipping the narrow column for a wide tank to save a little time. Through about 16 kilograms of uranium hand-poured into a tank built to be safe at 2.5. Through a water jacket that turned into a mirror and held the reaction alive for 20 hours. A bucket and a shortcut, set against a live nuclear reaction beside 3 standing men. That is the one wrong move. No explosion, no mushroom cloud, a shape that was there to save lives, deleted by hand. And the line that stays with you, the safeguard was never a switch anyone could throw. It was a shape, and they poured right past it. A shape that kept the uranium asleep, a shortcut that erased it. 3 men in an open room. If this one got you, hit subscribe. One wrong move drops a new one twice a week, and the next one is worse.